Susan never imagined her quiet life as a secretary would end with her tied to a chair in an abandoned building, armed men surrounding her, wondering if she'd see morning. Just hours earlier, she'd been invisible, exactly how she preferred it. The woman who made sure Susan stayed that way? Roxana. Beautiful, confident, and convinced of one absolute truth. Kang Min would never want someone like Susan. Roxana was wrong, and that mistake nearly cost Susan everything. Welcome back, Sphere family. If you're new here and haven't subscribed, now's the time. You don't want to miss how this unfolds. This is Story Sphere, where we tell stories that stay with you long after they end. Now, let's continue. The top floor of Kang Enterprises in San Antonio hummed with the kind of controlled chaos only found in powerful places. Deals worth millions closed in conference rooms with skyline views. Executives moved through marble hallways like sharks in expensive suits. Susan Martinez worked at a desk near the elevator bank. She answered phones, scheduled meetings, organized files. Nothing glamorous. She'd held the position for 2 years without making a single wave. Brown skin, dark eyes, hair always pulled back neatly. She spoke when spoken to, smiled politely, went home on time. Invisible by design. Roxana Castellanos occupied the desk across from hers. Where Susan faded into the background, Roxana demanded attention. Stunning in the way that turned heads. Sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than Susan's monthly rent. She'd been at Kang Enterprises for 6 months and had made her intentions crystal clear from day one. Kang Min was hers. The CEO rarely left his corner office. When he did, Roxana transformed. Her laugh got louder, her walk more deliberate, her neckline slightly lower. She'd find reasons to stop him in the hallway, lean in close with questions about projects she wasn't even assigned to. He was polite, professional, nothing more. That didn't stop her. You know he's never been photographed with a woman? Roxana mentioned one afternoon, filing her nails at her desk. She didn't look at Susan when she spoke, as if the observation was too casual to warrant eye contact. Everyone thinks he's married to the business. But I've seen the way he looks when he thinks no one's watching. Susan kept typing. He has a type, Roxana continued. The nail file paused. Sophisticated. Polished. European features, probably. Finally, she glanced over. Definitely not. The pause stretched just long enough to sting. Well, you know. Susan's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. She'd learned years ago that responding only fed the fire. Roxana wanted a reaction, proof that her words landed. Susan refused to give it to her. But the comments didn't stop. They never did. What Susan didn't know was that Kang Min had been watching her for months. He'd first noticed her during a conference call that went sideways. A client from Hong Kong was screaming through the speakerphone, threatening to pull a $15 million contract over a shipping delay that wasn't even the company's fault. Kang Min's assistant had frozen, unable to find the logistics report that would calm the situation. Susan had walked into the office to deliver mail. She'd heard the chaos, glanced at the frantic assistant, and quietly placed a folder on the desk. Inside was the exact document they needed. Shipping manifests, timestamps, third-party confirmation of the delay. She'd anticipated the need before anyone asked. Then she'd left without a word. Kang Min had opened the folder, scanned the contents, and resolved the crisis in under 3 minutes. When he asked his assistant who'd brought the file, the response was uncertain. Susan, I think. The secretary by the elevators. The one everyone overlooked. After that, he started paying attention. Small things mostly. How she handled aggressive callers with patience that never cracked. The way she organized chaos into clean systems. During a fire alarm evacuation, when everyone else rushed toward the exits in a panic, Susan had calmly walked through the office checking empty conference rooms and bathrooms, making sure no one was left behind before she descended the stairwell herself. She didn't perform kindness for an audience. That's what made it real. Kang Min found himself creating excuses to walk past her desk. He'd ask questions about files he could easily find himself. Request coffee he didn't need. Linger near the elevator bank longer than necessary. Susan treated him exactly the same as everyone else. Respectful, efficient, nothing more. It was maddening and fascinating. Roxana, meanwhile, escalated her campaign. She started wearing red every Thursday after overhearing someone mention it was his favorite color. Stayed late on nights he worked past 8. Once, she'd accidentally on purpose left a file in his office that required her to come back and retrieve it after everyone else had gone home. He'd had security escort her out and reminded her about building access protocols. The rejection should have been clear. Roxana interpreted it as a challenge. "He's just focused on work right now," she told Susan one morning, leaning against the cubicle divider. "Men like him need someone who understands power. Someone who can match his lifestyle." She examined her manicured nails. "Someone who looks the part when he takes her to galas and board dinners." Her eyes flicked towards Susan. "Not everyone can pull that off." Susan reached for her coffee, took a slow sip. "I'm sure you're right." The agreement seemed to satisfy Roxana. She smiled and returned to her desk. What Susan had learned was this: fighting only prolonged the conversation. Agreement ended it faster. 3 months before everything fell apart, Kang Min made a discovery that changed the trajectory of his company and Susan's life. His head of IT came to him on a Tuesday morning with evidence of a security breach. Someone had accessed confidential files containing client information, merger details, and internal financial projections. The breach wasn't external. It came from inside the building, specifically from the executive floor. Kang Min's expression remained neutral as he reviewed the logs, but anyone who knew him would recognize the danger in his stillness. He built his empire through calculated risk and absolute loyalty. Betrayal wasn't just bad business. It was personal. "Narrow down the access points," he said quietly. "I want to know everyone who touched these systems in the last 60 days. The investigation began immediately. What IT discovered was strange. The breaches followed an erratic pattern. Files accessed at odd hours, some during lunch breaks, others late at night. But the access codes traced back to multiple users, suggesting either a coordinated effort or someone covering their tracks by using different credentials. Several of those credentials belonged to secretaries and administrative assistants, including Susan's. Kang Min stared at her name on the report. He'd watched her for months now. Every instinct he'd honed over years of reading people told him she wasn't capable of corporate espionage. Susan didn't have the ambition for it, didn't have the connections to sell the information, didn't have the disposition for deception. But facts didn't care about instincts. He made a decision that surprised even his closest advisors. Instead of confronting her or launching a formal investigation that would alert whoever was actually responsible, he would bring her closer, put her in a position where he could observe her directly, protect her if she was innocent, or catch her if she wasn't. On a Wednesday morning, Susan received an email requesting her presence in Kang Min's office at 2 o'clock. She read it 3 times, searching for context. Had she made a mistake? Forgotten something important? Her mind raced through the past week's work, finding nothing irregular. Roxana noticed the email notification on Susan's screen. "CEO's office?" She raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual. You're not in trouble, are you?" "I don't think so." Roxana's smile was thin. "Well, good luck." At exactly 2 o'clock, Susan knocked on the heavy door of Kang Min's corner office. "Come in." The space was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown San Antonio. Minimalist furniture, dark wood, everything precisely arranged. Kang Min sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than a car, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when she entered. "Susan Martinez." He said her full name like he'd been thinking about it. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Mr. Kang. Please sit." She took the chair across from him, hands folded in her lap. Professional. Calm. Even though her heart was beating faster than it should. Kang Min studied her for a moment. Up close, he could see details he'd missed from a distance. The intelligence in her dark eyes. The quiet strength in the way she held herself. She wasn't fidgeting or trying to fill the silence with nervous chatter. Most people couldn't stand his silences. "I'm restructuring my immediate staff," he said finally. "My current assistant is transferring to our Austin office. I need someone who understands the flow of this building, who can anticipate problems before they develop, who doesn't require constant supervision." He paused. "I'd like you to take the position." Susan blinked. Of all the things she'd imagined this meeting might be about, this wasn't on the list. "I'm offering you the role of my personal assistant," Kang Min continued. "Effective immediately. 30% salary increase, direct access to executive resources, and an office adjacent to mine." The words hung in the air between them. "Mr. Kang, I'm not sure I'm qualified for. I've been watching you." He said it plainly, no embarrassment. You're the most competent person on this floor. Possibly in this building. You don't create drama, you solve problems quietly, and you have better instincts than people with twice your experience. Susan's mind was spinning. This was impossible. Personal assistants to the CEO were polished, connected, usually had MBAs and spoke 4 languages. They certainly weren't quiet secretaries who'd never even attended a company gala. Why me? The question came out before she could stop it. Kang Min's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because I trust competence more than credentials. And because everyone else underestimates you. He slid a contract across the desk. You don't have to answer now. Read it tonight. Let me know tomorrow. Susan took the contract with trembling fingers. Thank you, Mr. Kang. Min, his voice dropped slightly. When it's just us, you can call me Min. The news spread through the executive floor like wildfire. By the time Susan returned to her desk, every eye in the office was on her. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone dropped a coffee mug in the break room. Roxana's face had gone completely white. You. The word came out strangled. He chose you. Susan set her bag down carefully. He offered me a position. I haven't accepted yet. What position? Personal assistant. For a moment, Roxana just stared. Then something ugly twisted across her perfect features. Shock giving way to rage, giving way to something that looked almost like panic. She'd spent 6 months positioning herself for this exact role. 6 months of carefully orchestrated encounters, strategic wardrobe choices, staying late, learning his schedule, making herself indispensable. She'd studied his preferences, researched his background, practiced conversations in the mirror. And he'd chosen Susan. Quiet, invisible, black Susan. This is a mistake, Roxana said, voice shaking. He doesn't, you don't. She couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Susan opened her desk drawer, gathering her few personal items. I should probably start clearing out if I'm moving offices. You're actually going to take it. Not a question. An accusation. I'd be foolish not to. Roxana laughed, sharp and brittle. Do you really think this is about your skills? Men like Kang Min don't promote secretaries because they're good at filing. He wants something from you. The implication hung heavy. Susan finally looked directly at her. I'm sorry you're upset. But this isn't about you. Isn't it? Roxana leaned in close. I've worked twice as hard, made myself available, shown him I could be exactly what he needs. And he picks you instead. What did you do, Susan? What did you offer him that I wouldn't? The accusation was clear. Susan felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd dealt with comments, with snide remarks, with subtle digs for 2 years. But this was different. This was direct. I offered him nothing, she said quietly. And I'd appreciate you not implying otherwise. She gathered the last of her things and walked toward the elevator, feeling Roxana's stare burning into her back. What Susan didn't see was the way Roxana's hands clenched into fists, the way her jaw tightened, the way her mind was already racing toward darker possibilities. If competence was what Kang Min valued, Roxana would prove Susan wasn't competent at all. Susan accepted the position the next morning. Her new office was small but private, with a window overlooking the San Antonio River Walk, a desk with dual monitors, a phone with a direct line to Kang Min's office, access to files and systems she'd never touched before. The first week was overwhelming. Kang Min's schedule was brutal. Meetings from 7 in the morning until 8 at night, conference calls with international clients at odd hours, constant streams of emails requiring immediate attention. Susan learned quickly that his calm exterior masked a mind that operated at twice the speed of normal conversation. He'd reference details from meetings 3 weeks ago, connect seemingly unrelated pieces of information, make decisions that seemed reckless until they proved brilliant. Working for him was like trying to keep pace with a machine. But Susan adapted. She started arriving at 6 to prepare for his 7 o'clock meetings, created systems to track the complex web of projects and clients, learned to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. By the end of the second week, Kang Min's operations ran smoother than they had in months. He noticed. You're good at this, he said one evening, reviewing a brief she'd prepared. They were alone in his office, the skyline glittering beyond the windows. Better than I expected. Thank you. My last assistant took 4 months to reach this level of efficiency. You did it in 2 weeks. Susan allowed herself a small smile. I pay attention. Clearly. He set the brief aside and looked at her directly. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. I made the right choice. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Susan couldn't quite name. Then his phone rang, shattering the stillness, and the moment passed. What neither of them knew was that Roxana was 3 floors below, still at her desk long after everyone else had gone home, staring at her computer screen with growing desperation. She'd started small. Deleted emails before they reached Susan's inbox. Changed meeting times in the shared calendar. Moved files to incorrect folders. Tiny inconveniences that should have made Susan look careless. But Susan caught every single one. She'd developed backup systems, verification protocols, redundant checks. Every time Roxana sabotaged something, Susan's competence shone brighter in contrast. It was infuriating. Roxana's tactics escalated. She started spreading rumors, subtle suggestions that Susan must have connections to land such a coveted position. That maybe her relationship with Kang Min wasn't entirely professional. That people had seen them alone together late at night. The whispers circulated through the building. Susan heard them. She held her head high and ignored every single one. But Kang Min heard them too. And Kang Min didn't ignore anything. He called Roxana into his office on a Thursday afternoon. She'd primped for 20 minutes in the bathroom first, thinking this was finally her chance. He'd realized his mistake. He was going to apologize, offer her the position she deserved. Instead, he stood by the window, hands in his pockets, and didn't invite her to sit. "I'm aware of the rumors circulating about my assistant," he said without preamble. "I'm also aware of where they originated." Roxana's stomach dropped. "I'll say this once." His voice was quiet, but something in it made her skin prickle. "Susan Martinez is the most professional member of my staff. Any suggestion otherwise is not only false, it's defamatory. If I hear another whisper implying anything inappropriate about her conduct or character, I will personally ensure the source faces consequences." He turned to face her then, and Roxana saw something in his eyes that made her knees weak. This wasn't the polite, distant CEO she'd been pursuing. This was someone dangerous. "Do I make myself clear, Ms. Castellanos?" "Yes, sir." "You're dismissed." Roxana left his office with her face burning and her pride shattered. The rumors stopped immediately. But her anger didn't. That night, sitting alone in her apartment with a bottle of wine, Roxana made a decision. Subtle sabotage wasn't working. Rumors weren't working. She needed something bigger. Something that would definitively prove Susan was unworthy of Kang Min's trust. Something that would get her fired. Or better yet, arrested. Roxana spent the weekend planning. She knew about the security breach investigation. Everyone on the executive floor had been quietly interviewed by IT. She also knew that Susan's access credentials had appeared in the logs. That detail had been mentioned casually by someone in HR who liked to gossip. What if those credentials appeared again? What if evidence was found linking Susan directly to the theft? Roxana didn't have the technical skills to hack systems herself. But she had something better. Access to physical spaces and an understanding of how corporate investigations worked. Monday morning, she arrived early. The executive floor was empty except for security making their rounds. Roxana had volunteered to organize old files in the storage room weeks ago. A task nobody wanted that gave her legitimate reasons to be in restricted areas. She'd lifted a master access card from the janitorial staff. 5 minutes was all she needed. In Susan's new office, Roxana worked quickly. She planted a USB drive in the back of the bottom desk drawer, buried under office supplies. The drive contained encrypted files. Nothing incriminating on its own, but suspicious enough to raise questions. Then she slipped several printed documents into a folder labeled Personal. Internal financial projections that should never exist outside secure systems. Finally, she altered timestamps in the shared network, making it appear that Susan's computer had accessed confidential files at 2 a.m. on 3 separate occasions. It was crude, but it would be enough to trigger an investigation. All Roxana had to do was make sure the evidence was discovered. She sent an anonymous email to IT that afternoon, expressing concern about unusual activity from Susan's workstation. Included just enough technical detail to sound credible. Then she waited. The investigation launched within 48 hours. IT came to Susan's office on a Wednesday morning with Kang Min's head of security. They were polite but firm. There had been reports of unauthorized access. They needed to examine her computer and workspace. Susan felt the blood drain from her face. "I haven't accessed anything unauthorized. I don't even know what files you're talking about. This is just protocol, Ms. Martinez. We're checking everyone in the department. But they weren't checking everyone. They were checking her. Kang Min appeared in the doorway 20 minutes into the search. His expression was unreadable. What's going on? The IT director hesitated. We received reports of. I know what the reports said. Kang Min's voice could have cut glass. I want to know why you're in my assistant's office without consulting me first. Sir, the protocol requires. I don't care about protocol. Susan Martinez has more integrity than half the executives in this building. Whatever you think you're looking for, you won't find it. The IT director shifted uncomfortably. We have evidence of access logs, which can be falsified by anyone with basic technical knowledge. Kang Min stepped fully into the office. How long have you been conducting this investigation? 3 days. And you didn't think to inform me that you were investigating my personal assistant? The person with direct access to my schedule, my files, my confidential correspondence. The implications were clear. If they suspected Susan, they should have suspected him too. The IT director paled. We were trying to be thorough before. Get out. The words were quiet. Final. They left. Susan stood by her desk, trembling. She didn't understand what was happening, why her credentials would show unauthorized access when she'd never attempted anything of the sort. Kang Min closed the office door and turned to her. Someone is setting you up, he said simply. And I'm going to find out who. The investigation continued, but it shifted focus. Instead of targeting Susan, Kang Min's security team began analyzing the evidence itself, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, signs of manipulation. What they found confirmed his suspicions. The access logs had been altered. Timestamps didn't match network activity records. The files on Susan's computer had been transferred via physical USB, not downloaded through the network. Someone had planted evidence. Kang Min called Susan into his office that Friday evening. The sun was setting over San Antonio, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. They're trying to frame you, he said without preamble. The question is why? Susan had been thinking about nothing else for 3 days. I don't have enemies. I don't know why anyone would. Don't you? His tone made her pause. Kang Min walked to the window, hands in his pockets. You took a position someone else wanted. You've been succeeding in a role that threatens someone's ego or ambitions. This isn't random, Susan. This is personal. Roxana's face flashed through Susan's mind. The anger in her eyes when the promotion was announced. The accusations. The rumors. But framing someone for corporate espionage seemed extreme, even for wounded pride. I need you to be careful, Kang Min continued. Whoever is doing this has access to our systems and knowledge of our security protocols. That means they're close. He turned to face her. Until we identify them, I want you to vary your routine. Don't stay late alone. Don't access files from your home computer. And he hesitated, something flickering across his features. I want you to let me know if anything feels wrong. Anything at all. Susan nodded, though unease was settling deep in her stomach. What she didn't realize was that Roxana's plan was already spiraling beyond her control. The anonymous tip to IT had worked too well. The investigation had attracted attention outside the company. Specifically, from people who made it their business to monitor Kang Enterprises very closely. Rival organizations, criminal networks, groups who'd been watching Kang Min for years, waiting for an opening. They noticed when internal security tightened. They noticed when investigations launched. They noticed when patterns changed. And they noticed Susan. Kang Min had been careful to keep his personal life separate from his business operations. He never showed weakness, never revealed vulnerabilities, never allowed anyone close enough to become leverage. But he'd broken that rule for Susan. He protected her publicly, defended her reputation, kept her close despite the investigation. His behavior suggested something everyone had missed. She mattered to him, and to certain people, that made her valuable. The rival crew watching from the shadows began piecing together a plan. If Susan was important to Kang Min, she could be used, taken, held for ransom or trade. The fact that she was his assistant meant she likely had access to information they could exploit. They started surveillance, followed her home from work, learned her routes, noted that she lived alone in a modest apartment, drove an old Honda, had no security detail. She was vulnerable. All they needed was the right opportunity. Roxana, meanwhile, was growing desperate. Her planted evidence should have resulted in Susan's immediate termination. Instead, Kang Min had doubled down on protecting her. The investigation was now looking for whoever had falsified the logs. It was only a matter of time before they traced it back to Roxana. She needed to accelerate the timeline, create a situation so damaging that Kang Min couldn't ignore it, couldn't protect Susan, couldn't do anything but cut her loose. She accessed Susan's schedule through the shared executive calendar, something she technically still had permission to view from her old role. Next Wednesday, Susan had a late meeting scheduled. She'd be in the building until at least 8 o'clock, maybe later. Roxana made a small adjustment, changed the meeting time from 6 to 7:30, added a note that the client was running behind. Susan would be there late, alone, and Roxana would discover more evidence at exactly the right moment. What Roxana didn't know was that the rival crew watching Susan had intercepted that calendar change, seen the schedule alteration, realized Susan would be isolated and vulnerable. They saw an opportunity. The trap was set, but not the one Roxana intended. Wednesday arrived cold and overcast. Susan dressed carefully that morning, professional gray suit, comfortable shoes, hair pulled back neatly. She had the late meeting with a potential client from Houston, then planned to finish some filing before heading home. Routine. Normal. She didn't notice the dark sedan that followed her to work. Didn't see the men watching from the parking garage. Had no idea that multiple forces were converging on her for very different reasons. The day passed slowly. Meetings, emails, phone calls. Kang Min was in Austin for a conference. Wouldn't return until tomorrow. Susan handled everything smoothly, the way she always did. At 6 o'clock, she checked her calendar for the Houston meeting. The time had been changed to 7:30. She frowned. She didn't remember seeing that update. But clients rescheduled constantly. It wasn't unusual. Susan sent a confirmation email and settled in to wait. By 7, the executive floor was empty. Security made their rounds. Cleaning crews moved through the lower levels. She was alone in her small office, reviewing contracts, waiting. 7:30 came and went. No client. Susan called the number on file. It went to voicemail. Strange. She checked her emails again, looking for any communication she'd missed. Found nothing except the calendar update from earlier that week. An update she definitely hadn't made. Unease prickled at the base of her skull. She thought about Kang Min's warning. Asterisk, anything feels wrong. Anything at all. Asterisk. This felt wrong. Susan gathered her things quickly, deciding to leave. She could follow up with the Houston client tomorrow during business hours. The elevator ride down was quiet. Her footsteps echoed in the marble lobby. Security nodded as she passed through the doors into the parking garage. Her car was on the 3rd level, in her assigned spot near the back corner. The garage was dimly lit, half empty at this hour. Susan's heels clicked against concrete as she walked. She was halfway to her Honda when she sensed movement behind her. Her hand tightened on her bag. Instinct screamed at her to run. She'd barely turned when the first man grabbed her arm. Susan's scream was cut off by a hand over her mouth. She fought, kicking, twisting, trying to break free. But there were 3 of them, and they were strong, and she'd never been trained for this. Something sharp pricked her neck. The world tilted sideways. Everything went dark. Kang Min's phone rang at 9:15 p.m. He was in his Austin hotel room, reviewing acquisition documents, when his head of security's name appeared on the screen. Talk to me. Susan Martinez didn't check out of the building tonight. Kang Min was on his feet before the sentence finished. What do you mean she didn't check out? Her badge scanned in this morning at 6:20 a.m. Never scanned out. I checked the footage. She left through the lobby at 8:07 p.m., walked into the parking garage. That's the last visual we have. Her car. Still in her spot. Purse and phone found on the ground next to the driver's side door. Something cold and terrible flooded Kang Min's chest. How long have you known? 10 minutes. I called you immediately. Pull every camera in a 3-block radius. Contact SAPD. And get me the name of every person who accessed our executive calendar in the last 72 hours. Sir, if we involve police. I don't care. His voice could have frozen nitrogen. Find her. Now. Kang Min hung up and immediately dialed another number. This one didn't ring long. I need everyone, he said when it picked up. Something's happened. Within an hour, 16 men had mobilized across San Antonio. These weren't corporate security. These were the people Kang Min trusted with things that couldn't appear on official records. People who understood that his business interests extended into territories where law enforcement couldn't, or wouldn't tread. The cameras revealed what he'd feared. Susan had been taken by 3 men in a dark sedan. Professional. Quick. They'd known exactly where she'd be, and when she'd be vulnerable. This wasn't random. Someone had given them information. Kang Min's security team pulled the calendar logs. Found the meeting change made from Roxana Castellanos' account. Cross-referenced it with network activity. Roxana had altered Susan's schedule to keep her in the building late, alone. When Kang Min saw the evidence, something in him went very quiet. He made one phone call. Bring Roxana Castellanos to the office. I don't care what she's doing. I want her there in 30 minutes. Then he drove back to San Antonio at 90 miles an hour, his mind racing through every contact, every connection, every rival organization that might see value in taking someone close to him. The list was longer than he wanted to admit. Roxana was dragged into Kang Enterprises at 10:40 p.m. in her pajamas and a coat. She'd been watching a movie, drinking wine, when 2 large men had knocked on her apartment door and informed her she was needed at the office. Immediately, the executive floor was lit up like midday. Security personnel everywhere. Computer screens glowing. Phones ringing. And Kang Min standing in his office doorway, looking like controlled devastation. Where is she? Roxana's confusion was genuine. Where is who? Susan Martinez was kidnapped from our parking garage 3 hours ago. Each word was precisely articulated. You altered her schedule to keep her here late. You set her up to be alone and vulnerable. The blood drained from Roxana's face. I didn't know anyone would. What did you think would happen? Kang Min stepped toward her, and even the security personnel in the room seemed to lean back. You've been sabotaging her for weeks. Planting evidence. Spreading rumors. Now you conveniently ensure she's isolated after hours and she disappears. I just wanted her to get in trouble. Roxana's voice climbed toward hysteria. I planted files in her desk. I changed the schedule so she'd miss the meeting and look incompetent. I was going to find the evidence and report it. I never wanted anyone to hurt her. You planted evidence. Kang Min's voice dropped to something barely audible. You framed her for corporate espionage because you were jealous. Roxana was crying now, mascara streaming down her face. You were supposed to choose me. I did everything right. I'm what you need. Someone sophisticated, someone who fits your world. But you chose her instead, and I just wanted you to see you'd made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. The words came out hard. The mistake was not seeing what you were sooner. He turned to his head of security. Get her out of my sight. Contact our legal team. I want her prosecuted for everything we can make stick. As security escorted a sobbing Roxana out, Kang Min returned to the war room his office had become. Maps of San Antonio spread across every surface. Known locations of rival operations marked. Traffic camera footage being analyzed frame by frame. His phone rang. One of his people on the ground. We've got something. Dark sedan matching the description was spotted outside an abandoned industrial complex near the southeast side. Want us to move? Hold position, Kang Min ordered. I'm coming. He grabbed his coat and his gun and headed for the elevator. 20 minutes later, he stood outside a decaying warehouse surrounded by overgrown lots and rusted equipment. The sedan was parked by a side entrance, empty. His team fanned out silently. 8 men, all armed, all loyal. Kang Min approached the entrance. Inside, the warehouse was gutted, empty except for support columns and debris. Voices echoed from somewhere toward the back. He followed them. What he found made his blood turn to ice. Susan was tied to a chair in the center of a small office, hands bound behind her, duct tape over her mouth. Conscious but terrified. 3 men stood around her, arguing in Spanish about whether to contact Kang Min for ransom or sell her information to the highest bidder. None of them heard Kang Min approach until he was already there. Step away from her. The 3 men spun around, reaching for weapons. They never cleared leather. Kang Min's team moved like shadows. Within seconds, all 3 kidnappers were on the ground, disarmed, with guns pointed at their heads. Kang Min walked past them without a glance and knelt in front of Susan. His hands were shaking as he reached up to gently remove the tape from her mouth. It's okay, he said quietly. I've got you. You're safe now. Susan's eyes filled with tears. She'd been so terrified, so convinced she'd never see daylight again. Kang Min cut through the ropes binding her wrists with a pocket knife, his movements careful and controlled despite the fury radiating from every line of his body. The moment she was free, Susan collapsed forward into his arms. He caught her, held her, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry this happened. I should have protected you better." Behind them, his men were restraining the kidnappers with zip ties. But Kang Min wasn't paying attention to any of that. All that mattered was the woman trembling in his arms. After a moment, he pulled back just enough to look at her face. "Check for injuries. Did they hurt you?" Susan shook her head. They kept asking about you. About what I knew. About company files. You don't have to think about that now." He stood, lifting her with him, and carried her toward the exit like she weighed nothing. To his second-in-command, he said without looking back, "Clean this up. I want to know who sent them and who they're working for. And I want them to understand what happens when someone touches what's mine." The words echoed through the warehouse. Every person there heard them. By morning, word would spread through San Antonio's underworld. Susan Martinez was under Kang Min's protection, and crossing that line carried consequences. Kang Min took Susan to his penthouse. She'd protested weekly. She should go home. She didn't want to impose. She'd be fine on her own. He'd ignored every protest. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a downtown high-rise with views of the city that stretched for miles. Modern, minimalist, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. Kang Min set her down gently on a leather sofa and disappeared into another room, returning with first aid supplies and a bottle of water. "Drink," he ordered softly. Susan's hands were still shaking too hard to hold the bottle steady. Kang Min wrapped his hands around hers, helping guide it to her lips. She took a few sips, then set it aside. "I don't understand what happened." Her voice came out hoarse. "Why would anyone take me? I'm nobody. I don't know anything valuable." "You're not nobody." Kang Min was checking her wrists where the ropes had been, his touch impossibly gentle. "And you know me. That makes you valuable to people who want leverage. Because I'm your assistant." He looked up, met her eyes. "Because you matter to me." The admission hung between them. Susan's breath caught. "Min, they took you because I've been protecting you. Because I made it clear you were important. Because I stopped being careful about hiding how much I..." He cut himself off, jaw tightening. Susan reached out with one trembling hand and touched his face. "How much you what?" Kang Min turned his head slightly, lips brushing against her palm. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "How much I care about you. How much I notice every detail about you. How much it destroys me to see you hurt." Tears spilled down Susan's cheeks. "Roxana was right," she whispered. "You don't like black girls. You'd never look at someone like me." Roxana was wrong about everything. Kang Min's hands came up to frame her face, thumbs wiping away tears. "I've been looking at you since the day you quietly saved a $15 million deal. I've been watching you handle impossible situations with grace. I've been trying and failing not to fall for someone who has no idea how extraordinary she is." "I'm not extraordinary. I'm just..." "You're brilliant," he interrupted. "You're kind without being weak. You're strong without being hard. You see people clearly and still choose compassion. You make everything around you better just by being in the room." His forehead touched hers. "You were never invisible to me, Susan. You were the only person I could see." Susan let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "This is insane. You're my boss. We can't." "I know." Kang Min pulled back slightly. "If you want to transfer departments, I'll arrange it. If you want to leave the company entirely, I'll write you any recommendation you want. I won't use my position to pressure you into anything." He took a shaky breath. "But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I need you to know. I will protect you with everything I have. I will make sure nothing like this ever happens again. And I will wait as long as it takes for you to trust that this is real." Susan looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd driven across the state in the middle of the night when she was taken. Who'd stormed into a warehouse with armed men to get her back. Who was holding her like she was made of something precious. "Roxana said you had a type," Susan whispered. "That you'd never want someone like me." "My type," Kang Min said quietly, "is someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Someone who sees the ugliest parts of my world and still chooses kindness. Someone whose presence makes everything else make sense." His thumb traced along her cheekbone. "My type is you, Susan. It's always been you." She kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was soft and terrified and hopeful all at once. The kiss of someone who'd spent years being invisible finally allowing herself to be seen. Kang Min kissed her back like she was air and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again. "Stay tonight," he said. "Let me take care of you. Tomorrow we'll figure everything else out." Susan nodded. He carried her to the guest room, brought her clothes to sleep in, made sure she had everything she needed. Stood in the doorway like he couldn't quite bring himself to leave. "Min." "Yes. Will you stay?" "Just until I fall asleep." He was across the room in 3 strides. Kang Min lay down beside her on top of the covers, fully clothed, and pulled her against his chest. Susan curled into him, exhausted and traumatized and safe for the first time in hours. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured into her hair. "Sleep, Susan. I'll be right here." She fell asleep to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Kang Min stayed awake, one hand stroking her hair, watching her breathe, and making silent promises about what he'd do to anyone who ever tried to hurt her again. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Susan woke disoriented, taking a moment to remember where she was. The penthouse. Kang Min's guest room. The kidnapping. She sat up quickly, heart racing. But Kang Min was there, sitting in a chair beside the bed with a laptop balanced on his knee. He'd changed clothes at some point, looked showered and alert despite probably not sleeping. "Hey," he said softly, closing the laptop. "How are you feeling?" "Like yesterday was a nightmare. I wish it had been." He moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "I had my doctor come by early this morning while you were sleeping. He checked you over. No serious injuries, but you'll probably be sore for a few days. He left some medication for the anxiety if you need it." Susan processed this. "You had a doctor come here? To your home?" "I have a doctor who makes house calls for situations that require discretion." "Right. Because Kang Min wasn't just a CEO. She kept forgetting that." "What happened to those men?" she asked quietly. "They're being handled." The careful phrasing told her everything she needed to know. She didn't ask for details. "And Roxana?" Kang Min's expression hardened. "She's been arrested. Corporate espionage, falsifying records, conspiracy charges. She'll spend years in prison if convicted, which she will be, because the evidence is overwhelming. She didn't mean for me to get kidnapped. Her intentions don't matter. Her actions set everything in motion." His jaw was tight. "She sabotaged you out of jealousy and nearly got you killed. I feel no sympathy." Susan couldn't argue with that. "The office knows what happened," Kang Min continued. "I've made it clear that you were targeted because of your proximity to me, and that anyone who questions your position or competence will answer to me personally. That'll just make people think." "I don't care what people think." He took her hand. "But for the record, I've also made it clear that you've earned your position through merit, and that our personal relationship, if we choose to have one, is separate from your professional capabilities." Susan looked down at their intertwined fingers. "What does that mean? Our personal relationship? It means I'm not your boss anymore." She looked up sharply. "What?" "I've restructured the reporting hierarchy. You'll report to my COO instead of directly to me. You'll keep the same responsibilities, same salary, same office. But on paper, I'm not your superior." "You changed the entire company structure because of me?" "I changed it because I want to be with you without any question of propriety or power dynamics." Kang Min lifted her hand to his lips. "I want to take you to dinner without it being a business meeting. I want to touch you without worrying about HR violations. I want everyone to know you're mine without it costing you your career." Susan's throat tightened. "You barely know me. I've been watching you for months, Susan. I know how you take your coffee. I know you're left-handed, but use your right hand for the mouse. I know you bite your bottom lip when you're concentrating. I know you're brilliant at reading people and terrible at accepting compliments." He leaned closer. "I know you're scared right now because this is happening fast and it's intense and you've spent your whole life being overlooked. But I see you, and I'm not going anywhere." Tears stung Susan's eyes. "This is crazy." "Completely," he agreed. "But I've built an empire on calculated risks. And you're the best risk I've ever taken." Susan returned to work the following Monday. The executive floor was different. Quieter. People kept their heads down and their comments to themselves. Word had spread about what happened. The kidnapping, the rescue, Roxana's arrest. More importantly, word had spread about Kang Min's declaration at that warehouse. "She belongs to me." The whispers weren't cruel anymore. They were cautious, respectful even, because everyone understood now. Susan Martinez wasn't just the CEO's assistant. She was under his protection, and crossing that line carried consequences Roxana had learned the hard way. Susan's new office was slightly larger now, with better light and updated equipment. The restructuring meant she interfaced with the COO daily, but still maintained the same level of access to executive decisions. If anything, her role had expanded. People started coming to her for approvals, information, access to upper management. She became a gatekeeper in ways that transcended her job title. And she was exceptional at it. Kang Min kept his distance during business hours. Professional, appropriate, nothing that would undermine her authority. But at lunch, he'd appear in her office with food from wherever she'd mentioned wanting to try. In the evenings, he'd text to make sure she got home safely. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the kidnapping, he asked her to dinner. Not a business dinner. A date. Susan wore a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, deep burgundy, fitted but elegant. Did her hair down for once, letting natural curls frame her face. When Kang Min picked her up, the look in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman alive. He took her to a small, intimate restaurant tucked away from downtown. The kind of place that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. The food was incredible. The conversation flowed easily. Halfway through dinner, Susan set down her fork. "I need to say something." Kang Min gave her his complete attention. "I spent most of my life trying to be invisible," she said carefully. "It was safer that way. Easier. I didn't have to deal with people like Roxana, didn't have to face comments about not fitting in, didn't have to risk being hurt." She met his eyes. "You terrify me. Not because I think you'd hurt me, but because you see me. Really see me. And that's the scariest thing I've ever experienced." Kang Min reached across the table, took her hand. "I know," he said simply. "Being seen is vulnerability. Letting someone in is risk. After everything you've been through, I understand why that's frightening. But," Susan prompted, sensing there was more. "But I think you've been invisible long enough." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I think you're tired of hiding. I think part of you wants to be seen, wants to take up space, wants to stop apologizing for existing." He leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to stop shrinking yourself. Be as brilliant and capable and extraordinary as you actually are. And let me stand beside you while you do it." Susan felt something crack open in her chest. Years of careful restraint, of making herself small, of accepting less than she deserved. "What if I'm not ready?" she whispered. "Then I'll wait." Kang Min's voice was steady. "I'll wait until you are. I'll be patient while you learn to trust this. I'll prove every single day that I mean what I say. And what if people judge us? Judge me for being with you. Then they can answer to me." His expression hardened slightly. "I don't care about their opinions, Susan. I care about you." After dinner, they walked along the river walk. The water glittered with reflected lights. Tourists and couples strolled past. Music drifted from nearby bars. Kang Min held her hand the entire time. It felt like the most radical act Susan had ever committed. Simply existing in public beside him, visible and unafraid. When he kissed her goodnight at her door, she pulled him closer instead of letting him leave. "Stay," she whispered against his lips. "Susan." "I'm scared," she interrupted. "I'm terrified, actually. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." She looked up at him. "I want this. I want you. And I'm ready to stop hiding." Kang Min's control finally cracked. He kissed her like he'd been restraining himself for months, which he had. And Susan kissed him back with everything she'd been too afraid to show. That night, she learned what it felt like to be cherished, to be seen, to be chosen. 3 months later, San Antonio's business community gathered for the annual Commerce Gala. Susan stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress Kang Min had insisted on buying her. It was elegant and sophisticated and made her feel like someone who belonged at events like this. Her phone buzzed. "Downstairs whenever you're ready." She took a deep breath, grabbed her clutch, and headed down. Kang Min waited beside his car, devastatingly handsome in a tailored tuxedo. When he saw her, everything else seemed to fade from his awareness. "You're stunning," he said simply. "You're biased. Factually accurate." He offered his arm. "Ready?" Susan hesitated for just a moment. The gala would be full of executives, competitors, people who would judge and speculate and gossip. 6 months ago, she would have declined. Made excuses. Hidden. Tonight, she took his arm. Ready. The gala was exactly as intimidating as she'd feared. Hundreds of people in evening wear, champagne flowing, conversations thick with politics and posturing. Photographers capturing arrivals. When Susan and Kang Min walked in together, conversations paused. She felt the stares. Heard the whispers. Kang Min's hand settled on the small of her back. Protective, possessive, proud. Ignore them, he murmured. You belong here as much as anyone. Throughout the night, he made sure of it. Introduced her to investors and partners. Included her in conversations about business strategy. Made it clear through every interaction that she was his equal, not his accessory. And Susan rose to the occasion. She was intelligent, articulate, insightful. People who'd expected a trophy date found themselves genuinely engaged in conversation with her. By the end of the night, several executives had discreetly asked for her card. During a quiet moment on the terrace, Kang Min pulled her close. You were incredible tonight. I was terrified the entire time. Couldn't tell. He kissed her temple. You handled yourself like you were born for this. Susan leaned into him. I wasn't born for this. I was born for filing and answering phones and staying invisible. You were born for exactly who you became. Kang Min turned her to face him. Everything that happened, the job, the promotion, even the kidnapping, it all led here. To you finally seeing yourself the way I've seen you all along. And how's that? Extraordinary. He said it like a fact. Irreplaceable. Mine. Susan smiled. Possessive. Completely. He didn't apologize for it. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Susan Martinez. And I intend to spend a very long time making sure you never doubt that. What if I need reminding sometimes? Then I'll remind you. Kang Min kissed her softly. Every single day if necessary. They stayed on the terrace while the party continued inside, wrapped in each other, watching the San Antonio skyline glitter in the darkness. Susan thought about Roxana's words. Asterisk, he doesn't like black girls. He'd never look at you. Asterisk. She'd been so wrong. Kang Min had looked. Had seen everything Roxana insisted was invisible. Had chosen Susan not despite who she was, but because of it. And Susan had finally learned to stop shrinking herself to fit other people's expectations. She'd learned to take up space, to be seen, to accept that she deserved the extraordinary. What are you thinking? Kang Min asked, reading the expression on her face. Susan looked up at him. This powerful, dangerous, incredibly gentle man who'd turned her entire world upside down. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that I'm glad I was wrong. Wrong about what? I thought staying invisible was safer. That hiding was the only way to protect myself. She touched his face. But the safest I've ever felt is standing right here beside you. Visible. Seen. Chosen. Kang Min's arms tightened around her. You were never a weakness, he said quietly, echoing words he'd spoken once before. You're the one I'd destroy this city to protect. I know. Susan smiled. And that doesn't scare me anymore. The Mafia boss and the secretary who was supposed to be invisible. They weren't a story anyone expected. But they were exactly the story both of them needed. And in the end, that was all that mattered.